Jacob's always looking for an angle, isn't he? If there's an easy way to do something and a hard way to do something and a sneaky way to do something, which way is he going to do it? It's somewhere between easy and sneaky, right? And he might choose sneaky just for the fun of it. Life for Jacob is a constant struggle. And I don't know if that's because his name, because sometimes your name has an influence on how you act or whatever, or that was his personality, but he constantly sees things as bad. You give him a glass half full of water and he'll go, I think that's poisoned. Okay? I mean, he goes beyond that half full, half empty. He's going, you're trying to poison me? Because he's always looking for this advantage, and he assumes that everybody else is always looking for this advantage. And we see in the story of, I'm going to get the names wrong, I'm sorry, story of Joseph and Jacob, this constant stream of deceptions. So watch how it all flows through the story. But and I think part of that is if you're constantly looking for it, people tend to treat you that way. If you get the reputation of a trickster, people are going to start reacting to you that way, and it gets harder to sort of break the pattern. So watch the pattern of deception as we go through. And Jacob will be the deceiver and the deceived. He'll kind of suffer or he'll experience both ends of that. Watch the concept of sibling rivalry as we go through. Okay, we saw some of that with Sarah and Hagar, right, which results in Ishmael leaving and all that stuff. But we see it between Esau and Jacob. We see it between Joseph and his brothers. Okay, now Joseph is kind of snotty too, isn't he? He goes, oh, let me tell you this dream. Right. I had this dream, and I'm and all y'all bow down before me. Okay. Now, how culturally appropriate do you think that is for the youngest brother of 12 to do?
Unconceivable.
They probably took him out back beyond the hay and beat him or something. Yeah. But his father loved him best. Okay. So you, excuse me, you not only get this pattern of sibling rivalry, but you kind of get this pattern of the father or the mother encouraging it. They have favorites. So who is Isaac's favorite? Esau. Who is Sarah's favorite? Jacob. Okay. So it not only does the interaction happen on a son-daughter-child level, it happens on the parent level too. Okay. So there's this constant friction going on for everything. But for Jacob, for Israel, life is a constant struggle. Even when something good happens to him, he finds a way to poor mouth it. Okay? Oh yeah, well I had 12 children, but they weren't anything but a pain to me my whole life. Israel is not the kind of guy I would probably like to go out and have a pizza with. Because you go, oh, it's cold in here. Pizza's not good this week. Just constantly complaining. Now, think about that compared to Joseph. Does Joseph have a hard life? Yeah. Actually, much harder than Jacob's, doesn't he? He's in prison, he's a slave. But what's Joseph's attitude? Sorry?
I feel like it's positive. Like he's always sort of trusting in God.
Yeah, he says, I don't know why I'm here, or I don't know why this is happening, but I'm going to trust in God. And invariably, he's put in a very bad situation, and what happens? Somehow he prospers. Right? And I think we're given an alternative here. Into each life, some bad stuff is going to happen. But how are we going to react to it? Okay? Are we going to react to it like, this is the sermon part of the class. We're going to react to it like Jacob, Israel, and go, Are we going to react to it like Joseph saying, I don't know why this is happening, I'm not enjoying it, but I'm going to trust God to use it for His bigger purpose? Okay? And I'm not saying the story is made up to make that point, but I'm saying the story might be presented to make that point among others. Okay? Certainly the revelation of God and the history of Israel and stuff like that, but you do get these kind of opposing characters. in here. So for Jacob / Israel, life is a constant losing struggle. Even when he's winning, he's losing. Okay? And for Joseph, even when he's losing, he's still saying, God's blessed me in everything, and I'm going to trust God. Okay? So Rebekah gets pregnant after 20 years. This is Isaac's wife, right? I might have said, I'm sorry, I get the names confused. Rebekah gets pregnant with twins. Right? And look at Genesis 25:21. When does the fight start? Genesis 25:21. Genesis 25:21 and 22. Read both those verses. Someone for me, please.
Isaac prayed to the Lord and on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord.
Okay. And my translation says the children struggled together. Okay, so how long does it take for the fight to start?
3 hours.
Yeah, one verse. They're not even born yet, and they're fighting in the womb. You know, Esau gives Jacob an elbow, and Jacob grabs hold of Esau's foot and says, "I'm not letting go." I just, which one's born first? Esau. Which one wants to be born first? Jacob. Because they make the big deal of grabbing the heel, trying to pull him back in so he can get out first. Because what's the big deal about being born first? You get, presumably, you get the birthright, you get a double inheritance, you get greater status, and it's always good to be the eldest son, right? So we see this struggle going on. And Esau and Jacob never really get along, do they? They fight in the birthright and all, and then Jacob leaves. And even when he comes back, watch what happens when they come back. They have this tearful reunion. And I've always wondered exactly, bless you, what was going on there. Because, you know, I think the text says they hug each other's neck or something like that, and then they weep. Now, in most translations say hug the neck, but you can also translate that as bite. So I don't know if they're, you know, they're hugging, or here's one chance to get one good bite in before the fight starts again. So I don't know. But you notice they go two different ways. There's a reunion, but they don't wind up living in the same place. So I think it's a constant struggle. Jacob is not a comfortable guy to be around, I don't think, although his mama loved him. Right? And you'll see the struggle continue through the descendants. Another kind of principle we'll see in the Old Testament is sin has consequences, and many times sin has multi-generational consequences. So Monday we were talking about Lot and his daughters. So that gave rise to two different tribes or two different families, which will give the Israelites trouble when they're trying to come into the Promised Land again. And we see the same thing here with Esau. Okay, the people from Esau become Edomites, and you can look up those numbers or the references later, but they fight the Hebrews later on. So there are consequences to sin that can be multi-generational. Now we'll talk more about that later.
Now, behaviorally, do you think that Esau was better than Jacob? I know Esau probably went off. He
Define better. That's a good question.
I feel like Esau was actually maybe like I don't know. I feel like maybe behaviorally he's better. It seems like Jacob was always the trickster and everything. Esau was maybe a little bit dramatic. I think that was pretty much the only thing. You know, he comes in after work and he's like, "Oh, I feel like I'm just about to die." But I feel like that's pretty much it.
Esau does the things that you would expect a good son to do. Now, Esau means hairy or red or something like that, because apparently he came out like, it's covered with red hair is what it says, like fur, right? He was a really hairy baby. And then Jacob means heel snatcher, because he was grabbing hold. How would you like to go through life, you know, when your mama calls you heel snatcher? Or it could be if she called you red and hairy, it would be even worse. I don't know. But that's what they did. So, but Esau, how is Esau described? I didn't give a reference there. not finding this for some reason. Took another wife. Ishmael. Struggle together. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Chapter 25, verse 27. How is Esau described? Just take me through this step by step.
The outdoors.
He becomes a skillful hunter. Is that an honorable thing for a young man to do? Absolutely. That's what you expect a young man to do. To go out and hunt and provide food and do all those outdoorsy kinds of things. Because that's what a good Jewish man does, right? He's a man of the field. So not only is he a good hunter, he knows how to manage goats or grow crops or whatever. Those are the things that are required for a man, right? What do they say about Jacob?
He was content to stay home among the tents.
Yeah, he was a peaceful man. He was a good boy. You know, he loved his mama. His mama loved him. He was a mama's boy. Esau's out in the fields. I killed a deer today. Where's Jacob? Where does it say he lives? In the Who said in the kitchen? Who said that?
I did.
Perfect. Thank you. You got it. He lives in the tents and he likes to cook.
He's a baker.
He's a mama's boy. Those are not honorable occupations for him. Men are outside. Men are doing stuff. Men don't stay in the tent and cook because women stay in the tent and cook. This is, I mean, even from the very first descriptions, not shaping up to be what we would want our hero to be. Now, Esau's fault is he's impulsive or weakness. Okay? He doesn't think ahead. You give him 2 candy bars and say, eat one today and have one tomorrow. What's he going to do? Both at the same time. He's going to get crumbs all over his red hair or whatever, right? I mean, so he's who we would want him to be, except he's impulsive. Jacob is who we don't want him to be. I don't know if he has a whole lot of, well, he's certainly dedicated. But other than that, I don't know if he has a whole lot of redeeming characteristics. Yeah. He's not the manly man. He's not the guy that you would expect to be the hero. Okay? He's not the David who kills lions and bears with the slings. And he's the one that's always back in the tent making a souffle. Yeah. So, Esau hated broccoli. Jacob loved broccoli. That's all you need to know about him.
And Jacob knew how to cook broccoli.
Jacob knew how to cook broccoli. He had a great cheese sauce for his broccoli. But the point here is it's a very, very unlikely hero. And 2 things going on. I mean, I think it's reality. They didn't just make up a good character and a bad character. But more importantly, God can use who He wants to. Okay? When we get to Samson, we'll hopefully have some fun going through all the terrible things about Samson. I mean, he's the poster boy for dysfunctionality on every level. And yet he shows up in the book of Hebrews in the roll call of faith. Okay? So can God use imperfect people? Thank goodness. Because what does that mean? He can use us. Okay? Because I don't know, hopefully none of us are bad but we're bad. But God can still use us. Okay? So Esau comes in hungry. And what does Jacob say? Jacob's got his eye on the prize, right? He's wanted to be born first since before his birth. So what does he say? Yeah, give me your birth. Now, I don't know that that's legally binding or whatever, but apparently it was. So Esau throws away his birthright for a bowl of lentil stew. Okay.
He probably spit in it.
Yeah, I probably. You know, I never thought about that, but the next time I tell the story, I'm going to use that. Because I spent time in prison, and that's what they do. All right, so the sibling rivalry gets worse. With the prompting of his mother, Jacob decides to deceive Isaac. Right? To get not only the birthright, but the major inheritance. So in that deception, Jacob gets the inheritance and Esau gets the crumbs. Okay? So the idea was the father could pass on this magic or whatever. Now, God uses that, and the covenant does go through Jacob instead of Esau. But imagine the tension in the family now. So, Esau is figuring out how, if Jacob will ever leave the tent and go hunting with him, two will go out, but only one's going to come back. There's going to be an arrow accident or something. So his mama, again, says, you better leave town for a while until things blow over. And that's really what, the getting a wife is an excuse for Jacob to leave town. Now, in doing that, he actually does something right because he gets a wife from the right people. Okay? He has kind of a Hebrew-related wife. Esau marries one of the tribe of Ishmael. So he's kind of out of the covenant there. I'm so far out of my notes, I'm sorry. Let me see, let's go back. The other thing is Jacob's the second son. He's the spare son. So all the honor goes to the first son. Gained by conniving. What's the honorable way to gain something in David's time, first century time, Jesus' time? You go up to somebody, you do them face to face, you don't deceive them, and you attack them or interact with them, or you don't sneak up on them from behind. Right? You don't wait till they're blind and put goat fur on your hands and say, I'm Esau. Honestly. But notice the part. Jacob deceives Isaac through blindness. Right? How is Jacob deceived on his wedding night?
Blind.
It's dark, he can't see through blindness. Okay? So you see kind of a repeating pattern here. When Jacob gets ready to pass the blessings on to Joseph's children, Joseph puts one child at his right hand, one child at his left hand. What does Jacob do? He switches hands. I don't know. He just did it. So if you read the text carefully, you'll see another pattern here. The human standard sort of was the oldest son gets the inheritance, the oldest, but 4 times in the book of Genesis, the younger son gets it. Okay? Isaac is not the oldest son, is he? Second son. Jacob is not the oldest son. Joseph is the 12th son. Okay? And when the hands switch, I think it's Ephraim or something, who's the younger son that gets the blessing. Okay? Now later on in the book of Romans, Paul's going to make a point of that, but you got to take my other class. We'll talk about that. Look at how Jacob changes. You were talking about this after he wrestles with God. He really does change. Now he still stays a miserable man, but at least his trickery seems to go way down after he has this encounter with God. Do Jacob and Esau ever reconcile? I don't think so. We could argue back and forth, but I think they agree to get along. They can live close by, but they're not going to live next to each other. Does Jacob ever learn to care about people? I think Jacob is a young man. Does he care about anybody other than himself? Doesn't care about his father. Doesn't care about his brother. No, I don't think so. But in his older age, does he care about people? Give me an example.
Well, certainly later on, whenever they're going to send Benjamin off, he's just like, don't send my son.
Yeah. So we do get this vision of Jacob later in life as really loving his children and really mourning when he thinks he's lost his children and stuff like that. Okay? So I think over the years he does change some. I don't know if it softens or whatever, but he becomes more human. Okay? Let's stop there. I don't think he ever stops striving. I don't think he ever stops looking for an advantage. I don't think he's ever happy. I don't see anything about Jacob's story anywhere where he's ever happy, unless he's just put something over on somebody. Okay? Oh, I got this idea. I'm going to take these sticks and I'm going to put the goats in front of them, and I think he enjoys that because he's kind of. Look at Genesis 47:9. This is Jacob, Israel, looking back at his whole life. He's being introduced to Pharaoh, and he's looking back at his whole life, and this is how he describes his life. Genesis 47:9. Someone read that for me too, please.
And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of my pilgrimage of my father."
I'm 139 and I'm not as old as my father. This is a guy who wrestled with God. This is a guy who encountered God. This is a guy, and he summarizes his life. And how does he summarize his life? I'm not as old as my dad. I'm a whole lot older than you, Pharaoh, but you know, my years have been few and unpleasant. Yeah. You want to just slap him and say, come on. You're the father of Israel. I mean, you know, you're Israel. But his attitude is miserable. And that's why I don't know that he ever enjoyed life. He could have.
I agree.
But because he was so tied up and constantly striving, looking for loopholes and stuff, and he constantly thought somebody was taking advantage of him.
He's kind of like a warrior.
Well, I don't know about that, but now compare that to Joseph. Go over to Genesis 50:20. Now this is, you know, Joseph who's been framed for crimes, who's been left in a hole, sold in slavery, in prison. Here's how he characterizes his life. Someone read me Genesis 50:20.
As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today.
Okay, so he really saw his life from a godly perspective. Okay, doesn't mean his life was always pleasant, but I think he enjoyed his life a whole lot more. And I don't know that enjoying life is the goal, but I think that we need to look at our lives from a perspective point of view. That yes, bad things are going to happen, but if we are in God's will, those things will be used for the greater good. Right? And it's interesting to me that we see Jacob and Joseph so matched like that at the end. Both very charismatic characters. Okay? Not like Isaac, but so if you had to say what could you learn from the life of Jacob, what would you say? What do we learn from Jacob's life? What does this story teach us?
It's all about how, like, your outlook, like your attitude to everything.
Yeah.
Trusting in God even through struggles.
To learn to strive for the right things.
For the right things, yeah, I like that. If you deceive, what's liable to happen to you? You're going to be deceived. Okay? You're going to tend to be around people who deceive. Did Laban deceive Israel? Yeah. He tricked him with the daughters. Now, Laban's excuse is, well, I had to marry off my older daughter first, but who's Jacob's wife? Rachel. Oh, Rachel. When they're leaving Laban, does Rachel deceive her father? Yeah. She steals the idols and stuff like that. So there are all kinds of deceptions going on all kinds of levels. I don't know why, just Rachel. Because he has 3 wives, right? Yeah, at least. Okay. So he accomplishes amazing things, but he's never happy. He's in God's will the whole time, but he's never happy. Okay? Now, compare that to Joseph. What do we learn from Joseph's life? What man means for evil, God means for good. If you're persecuted, can God still use that for the good? Yeah. We're talking in Acts today, or the class, the New Testament, that the second missionary journey, Paul and Barnabas have a split. That's a bad thing. But now God has 2 missionary teams instead of just 1. So God can use those bad things. Now, if we have a choice, how should we live our lives? Joseph or Jacob? Hopefully Joseph. And I think that might be one of the points. If you start a cycle of theft and deception, you shouldn't be surprised that people steal from you. Okay. We talked about these rivalries, the Ishmael, Sarah, Hagar thing. Now Ishmael becomes the father of the Arabs. We talked about that Monday. Jacob becomes the father of the Jews, and the covenant gets passed through Jacob for, who knows, for godly reasons. Let's just put it that way. You know, if I were God, which one would I choose? Probably Esau. But it's Israel. Okay? Esau stays put, and he becomes father of the Edomites, and then he marries into Ishmael's family. So if we can trace kind of the whole Arab, I don't know if the right word is tribe, but we can trace them back through Esau and Ishmael. Okay? But again, to Abraham as their father. So you see the rivalries causing immediate problems. You see the rivalries causing long-term problems. And again, that's something we'll trace through the whole Bible. And that's just human. All right, so Jacob has to leave town. He goes to Laban, and where does he meet his wife? At the well, right. Always got to meet your wife at the well, right? It's an Old Testament principle. I guess that was I don't know. So he engages in this long 20-year cheating relationship with Laban. But notice, God blesses him, doesn't he? He winds up with more goats and sheep and everything when he leaves than when he came. Now, I don't know that he's happy about that blessing unless he's done it through trickery, but he is blessed. Okay? So God picks who he wants for his purpose. Again, not because Jacob is a good guy. But why does God pick Abraham? Just because he did. No inherent value there. He's confirming the covenant with Jacob just like he confirmed the covenant with Isaac, confirmed the covenant with Abraham. Can't claim any value there. I mean, if you think about it, or if you're Jewish, your physical heritage is pretty spotty, isn't it? I mean, yeah. It's incest or just you can't. It's hard to be really proud of what's going on there. So, wouldn't you have just loved to have been around the dinner table with Laban and Israel and Rachel and all those? Do y'all watch? Was it reality TV? You have a favorite reality TV show? Can't you just imagine it being like that? Just constant drama. So I guess he had to stay 20 years. I don't know. It couldn't have been comfortable.
It's funny, Laban's funny because I think he has one more. He actually has a verse before he ever meets Jacob. Whenever the servant, Abraham's servant, comes to Rebekah, and the servant goes, "Oh, I have all these gifts and stuff," and he's like, "Come on in."
Yeah. Hey, go back. Yeah. I mean, So Jacob's results. Jacob prospers and is blessed by God. Jacob's wives strive with each other. So how do women strive with each other in biblical times? Old Testament times? Well, I've had 7 children. You've only had 2. Or you haven't had any children yet. So in the culture, the way women could gain status or approval was having children. And if you didn't have children, it was an indication not only that you were flawed as a woman, but God was mad at you. Okay? Why do the husbands pray to God for children? Because the idea that God is in control of everything, and if God doesn't give you children, God must be mad at you. Okay? Why did Job's friends say all these bad things are happening to him?
Because God was mad at him.
Because there must be sin. There must be sin somewhere in your life. Right? So the Old Testament Hebrews, their perception was God is in charge of everything. Anything that happens, God has caused it to happen. So if you are rich, automatically God is pleased with you. Because how else did you get rich? If you were poor, God is automatically mad with you. because you're suffering. God must be mad at Job. There must be sin in Job's life, or bad things wouldn't happen to him. And that's kind of their view of history too. So if we look at the philosophy of the Old Testament as we go through, it's this idea of history reflects God's purpose. Now, theologically, that's sound. But that's really how they saw history on a day-to-day basis. That God controlled everything and God made things happen. So why did the exile happen? It's because they didn't follow God's law. So when they came back from the exile, they wanted to be very, very sure to follow God's law. So I think it works on a religious point of view and a secular point of view. Okay? But to them, the idea of why did Hurricane Sandy hit New York? If you ask a Jew, they'd say, well, God sent it. God wanted that to happen. Now today we don't necessarily see it that way, and I would say that's more satanic influence than a godly influence. But to them, God was in charge of everything. Okay. Now, the way this plays out in the New Testament, y'all remember the parable of the rich young ruler in the New Testament? And right after that parable, I think the disciples say, well then who can be saved? No, Jesus says, it's easier for a rich man to get into heaven than a camel to pass through an eye of a needle, right? And then the disciples say, who can be saved? And the reason they say that is what they're really saying is, if a rich man who's blessed by God can't be saved, what chance do we poor people who apparently aren't being blessed by God have to get into heaven? And that's where Jesus says, no man can get into heaven by his own power, but it's God who gets you into heaven. So it's you can't buy your way into heaven. You can't use your earthly evidence of God's pleasure. So it's that same working out of that principle here. So Leah has 7 children. She gets bragging rights. Rachel has 2, Bildah. Does anybody know how to pronounce her name? I don't know. She has 2. But the important ones are Joseph and Benjamin, right? And Joseph is kind of the last one. So they get the final deception. They leave without saying goodbye. They steal the household gods. Does that strike you by as strange? Well, what are all these household gods doing floating around? Apparently that's just, even though they are Hebrews, even though they know Yahweh God, they're still worshiping, the god of the hearth or something like that. What?
Is that like a real thing?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I wasn't joking that time. There really is a god of the house god. Or, and very often associated with the hearth, with the warmth of the fire and stuff like that. So you would propitiate the house gods. And we see that continuing certainly into Roman times, where the back of the house is literally a shrine to the household god. So the whole, in a rich person's house, the whole back wall of the house would be devoted to the little house shrines for the gods. So you would worship the god of your family, you would worship the god of the hearth, you would worship the god of the kitchen. There are all kinds of gods floating around. And then whatever you want, that's which god you worship. Okay? So we see similar stuff. So again, the Old Testament, they were very much polytheistic. You want to worship Asherah? Okay, worship Asherah. You want to worship Baal? Okay, worship Baal. Depends on where you are and what you want. So you worship the local gods. But yeah, a lot of people had household gods. So when she steals her father's household gods, what's the implication of that?
That they weren't true God followers.
Yeah, but what else? If you've grown up to think the household gods are important to the security, prosperity of your house, and you steal those gods...
She didn't care about her family.
Yeah. She's kind of spitting in her father's face. I don't care what happens to the house. These gods that have been taking care of the house, I'm going to steal them. Because I don't care what you want, I want what I want. So she didn't apparently get along too well with her father either. All right. Just more deception. But we see at one point, I think I've got it in my notes, that Israel actually throws out all the household gods of his whole family. And it's shortly thereafter that you see God renewing the covenant with him. So I think it's a positive step that God rewards. Okay? Jacob's trip home. Very interesting. So he's left town. He's met God. He has, he prays to God at Bethel and says, God, if you just let me come home eventually, you will be my God forever. Okay. Now he's coming back to Bethel, and God has provided for him, and he has another encounter with God. Okay. And this is where he wrestles with God. But before that happens, he knows that Esau is coming. So go to Genesis 39. Let's look at this in just a little bit of detail. Again, if you were thinking about it, everything he does makes absolute sense, but sometimes you have a tendency to slip over it in the reading. Did I do that right? 32:9. I'm sorry. 32:9. So he knows he's going to encounter Esau. 32:7. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people who were with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two companies. Because remember, Esau is the angle looker. Jacob is the, and he says, I'm going to divide my company into two, for if Esau comes to one company and attacks it, then the company which is left will escape. And he's thinking, okay, if I were in Esau's position, this is what I'd do. I'd be coming for blood. Okay, so I'd be willing to sacrifice the first group so the second group can get away. But now this is the first time I know of, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first time in verse 32:10 is where we see any kind of repentance or humility on the part of Jacob. Someone read that for me, please.
I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I have crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps.
Okay, so this is, I don't want to say this is a deathbed confession, but you start to see him change a little bit. It's a high pressure time. He's saying, oh, okay, God, only you can deliver me. And look at verse 11. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he will come and attack me and the mothers with the children. So apparently he has this emotion for his children, if nothing else. Okay, so he spends the night there, verse 13. Then he sends a present to Esau. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, just a whole bunch of stuff. Okay. Verse 16, he delivered them in the hand of his servants. Every drove by itself and said to his servants, pass on before me and put a space between droves. He commanded the one in front, saying, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong and where are you going, and to whom these animals in front of you belong, then you shall say, these belong to your servant Jacob, is a present to my lord Esau, and behold, he is also behind you. Okay, so he's trying to bribe, I don't know if he's trying to bribe his brother. I guess the favorable interpretation is he's trying to make atonement. Okay, I stole your birthright, but I'm going to give you back all these sheep and goats and stuff like that, and maybe that'll kind of even things out. In whichever way he's trying to curry favor. So now he's sending three groups ahead. And in verse 22, they spend the night in camp. They rose the same night, and he takes his 2 wives and 2 maids and his 11 children and crossed the ford of the Jabbok, and he sends them back across. So he's putting the stream between them. He's really trying to separate and protect his family, to give them a chance to get away. So he goes back, he's alone, and he wrestles with the man until daybreak. Why did he do that? This is one of those things. I want some more information here. How'd this man show up? Why'd they decide on a wrestling match? But they did. So they wrestle all night. In verse 25, he sees that he had not prevailed against him. I don't know what the socket of his thigh, I guess it's his hip joint. So then Jacob's hip joint is dislocated, but he still, he says, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob refuses to give up and says, I will not let go unless you bless me. Tells him his name. And then in 28, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. And that's literally, Israel means fight with God or struggle with God. So again, he is constantly striving. I don't know if he knows he's striving with God at the beginning, but he certainly knows he's striving with God at the end. And then he says, verse 30, so Jacob named the place Peniel, For he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved. And this is the point where we see him changing. So after this, we don't see any deception. If you look at it favorably, he really does try to do everything right. Still don't think he's happy, but he does everything right. Okay. Why would Israel struggle with God all night long? I don't know. Doesn't tell us. Apparently that's his character. I don't know if it was in this class or the other one we talked about. The guide we use when we go to Israel takes great pride in being an Israeli. I mean, certainly politically, modernly, but also culturally. And her view of Judaism is someone who struggles with God. So from our sort of Christian conservative perspective, we would say, okay, God says it, that settles it. All right? From her perspective, God says it, and that starts the argument. And she is proud of that. That is her heritage. She would say, you know, we are not sheep that just takes whatever God says. We're going to argue with God. We're going to strive with God. If we have to wrestle with God all night long, we'll wrestle with God all night long. And just on a very basic level, it has an influence on how they understand the Bible. So if we take God's Word as authoritative and the Bible says it, what do? Okay, we may not like it, but we go, okay, that the Bible says it. If they see that, they go, well, wait a minute, I don't like that. Is that really what God meant? Is it, you know, he says, okay, walk a mile in their shoes. Now, well, does that mean I can't walk a mile and a half? Can I only walk half a mile? God says, don't work on the Sabbath. Okay, God says don't work on the Sabbath. I'm not going to work on the Sabbath. But what does work mean? Even more importantly, when does the Sabbath start?
Why do they put themselves through that?
It's just, it's kind of just in the, I mean, white Americans eat hot dogs. I mean, it's in our nature. That's how they were raised. That's how they think of themselves. Just because God says it, they're not going to accept it. They're going to wrestle with it. They're going to negotiate with God. They're going to say, now think, if you're Jewish and the Sabbath is important to you, how do you tell when Sabbath starts? Is that not that's a legitimate question, isn't it? How do you tell? They had to figure that out. What is work? Is lighting a fire work? Well, they decided it was. So what do? You hire a Gentile to light your fire. Now, if you follow that too far, it gets really weird. But that's their nature. So, and I'm spending time on this because as we read the rest of the Old Testament and the prophets and all that stuff, I want you to understand that is their background. Is not to just because somebody says it, they're not necessarily going to accept it, or they're not going to try to negotiate or argue or strive and get something better. So remember, their hero is Jacob. So they don't necessarily see, you know, they joke, if you've got 3 Jews, you have 4 opinions. Because they literally love to, it's always an adventure going to Israel with Gila, because, I mean, she'll get up in your face in a hurry. Not in a bad way, but I mean, she just, you know, we'll say something we just take as granted for Christians. She'll say, why do you say that? And then she'll, but you see, that's not good enough. And that's why, are y'all familiar with the Mishnah, the Talmud? So for Judaism, there's the Torah, 5 books. Then there are the prophets and the writings, the Psalms and stuff like that. But then they have a whole oral tradition that's commentary on the Bible that eventually gets written down. It's called the Talmud. But they hold that authoritative too. So how do they know when the Sabbath starts? Well, Rabbi Eleazar says this, Rabbi Gamaliel says this, and we think the answer is this. Okay? And to them, that's as authoritative as the Torah.
I think I respect that as much as I don't understand it. If that makes sense. I guess, like, in some ways I respect it because it's that questioning, it's that seeking, it's that wrestling, and that the other times, like, why would you wrestle with God?
Yeah,
You just accept it.
because that's what Jacob does.
Instead of wrestling, you know, we we just kind of agree.
Yeah, that's why I want to know why they get in a wrestling match. You know, did God say, okay, 2 out of 3, or
Do you know what the Jacob is good at?
you know, or Jacob said, okay, I'll wrestle you for dinner. I mean, I don't know. But that's their culture, is somebody who, a people who will not necessarily automatically accept what God says. And if you think about, and that can be good, because think about Moses and God. God, at Mount Sinai, God says, well, let me just wipe them all out, Moses, and I'll make you some more. And Moses goes, no, let me argue with you, God. Moses intercedes for his people. Okay, because he does have this kind of, I don't know if it's because he has this culture of arguing with God or whatever, but he loves his people, and he's not afraid of God to argue with God.
Well, even Abraham does that a lot.
Yeah. Oh, if I can find 50, well, how about 40? You know, it's this idea of you honor God, you respect Him. He's an awesome God, but that doesn't mean you can't question Him, right? And it's a different perspective from us. Yeah. So just because some prophet comes in out of the wilderness, do you believe what the prophet says? Not necessarily. You're going to argue with him. You're going to test him. Okay. Meets Esau. We talked about this. He does have some courage. So when he finally meets Esau, he puts himself between his family and Esau. And let's see, where do they bite each other on the neck? Where is that? It's got to be here somewhere.
33 verse 4.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was wrong page. Yeah. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. Now that fell on his neck can also be bite. So I don't know. He bit him and then they both wept. Now I think really here it probably is, this is a reunion. Okay, I think this is a legitimate reunion. But it's a shaky reunion. So watch what happens here. I think I've actually gotten, yeah. Look at Genesis 33:11. Jacob or Israel says, please take my gift which has been brought to you because God has dealt graciously with me and because I have plenty. Thus he urged him and he took it. Does Esau want to take that? The gift? No, look back at verse 9. But Esau said, I have plenty, my brother, let what you have be your own. So Jacob offers the gift. Esau refuses the gift. Because if Esau refuses the gift from Jacob, what does that mean? Yeah, it's all even. But then Jacob makes him take it. Because Jacob is doing everything he can to make sure. So then Esau says, okay, let us take our journey and go, and I will go before you. So let's get going. Let's travel together. Then Jacob says, oh no, I got women, I got children, Leah's got a backache, I got a goat with a hurt foot. We can't go as fast. You go ahead and I'll catch up. So he refuses to travel with him. Okay? And then Esau says, well, let me leave some people with you. And Jacob says, no, that's okay. And I don't know if Jacob thinks these guys are spies or what, but he didn't want anything to do. And then you notice they go and they live in two different places. Okay? So I think this is a reunion. I think it really is a reunion, but I think it's one of those trust but verify things. They're not real comfortable being together because they've just got so much history. All right, now you get you get Joseph. What kind of guy is Joseph? Go to 37:2. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when he was 17 years of age, was doing what?
Pastoring.
Even when he was young. Okay, so he's actually put ahead of his brothers. And then at the end of verse 2, so he's before he should, because his father loves him so much, he gets to go out and take care of the sheep and stuff like that. And how does he treat this opportunity? How does verse 2 end?
Tattletale.
Yeah! Oh, you didn't see what Judah did? Oh, yeah, I can't believe old Dan, he let the sheep go. Is that the honorable action of a younger son? No. Israel loves Joseph more, so he dresses him better, okay, indicating his father's favor. Then Joseph has the dream. Now, let's see where it is. Yeah, so Joseph tells the dream, and what would be the act of a good father who wants to keep peace in his family when his youngest son tells a dream like this?
To discipline?
Yeah, that's not your brothers, it's something. But look in verse 11. Was his father? His brothers are jealous, but his father was going, well, yeah, that might be right. So his father is adding fuel to the problem. Okay, so the sons are out taking care of the sheep and goats again. The father sends Joseph out again, and the brothers have just had too much. So they get ready to kill him. Okay? And Reuben and Judah say, okay, well, let's not kill him. Let's sell him into slavery. So to some extent, they defend him a little bit. So he's sold into slavery, and he goes to Egypt. Terrible way to get to Egypt, but that's exactly what God wanted, wasn't it? Because God is building a place for the Jews to be sheltered in the famine times. Everybody knows the story. He has good times, he has bad times. Joseph is a very intelligent guy, apparently. He knows he knows who's in a dangerous situation. He knows when to run away. He knows when to dress up. When he's called before the king, he makes sure he's shaved. And because in that culture, shaving, you didn't have a beard, you wanted to shave. So he knows how to present himself well. He's not afraid to give God glory. When he goes to interpret the dream, okay, look at chapter 40, verse 8. Chapter 40, verse 8, he says, Then they said to him, We have had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it. Then Joseph said to them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please. So he's not taking personal credit for this. He's giving God credit. So he's apparently a very righteous sort of guy as well as a very smart guy. So he earns his keep. He explains about the famine. He has a solution for the problem that makes a lot of sense. He has a solution for the problem that puts even more power in Pharaoh's hands. I don't know if you notice that when you go through. But he says, okay, let's take all the surplus, and then when the famine hits, we can sell the grain. So the Pharaoh warehouses the grain and then sells it, and it essentially gains a whole lot of wealth in the process. Okay, so Pharaoh says, I'm really pleased with Joseph. Now, Israel sends the brothers to Israel to get grain, and they meet Joseph. They don't know who he is, right? Joseph, they buy grain from Joseph, and what does Joseph do? Someone from the back. They load up the grain and go home, but what does Joseph slip into the grain?
Well, he puts their money in it for the first time.
And then he accuses them of stealing it, doesn't he? So we got more deception. And it, I guess if we want to think of Joseph positively, maybe this is some payback. Or maybe he's just testing his brothers. I don't know. It seems more like payback and revenge to me, but he certainly seems to enjoy jerking them around. Because he does it twice, doesn't he? And he gets his father to kind of send a hostage. So again, we think of Israel as not having any redeeming characteristics and Joseph having all redeeming characteristics. But Joseph might have a touch of revenge in him. I could be wrong, but it seems to me like that. So he finally gets the family to Egypt, and they stay there and they prosper. I guess the last point I want to make is look at verse 46, 26. This will become more important when we get to the Exodus. Genesis 46, 26. How many people go to Egypt?
66.
That's not a lot, is it? Now when we go through the Exodus, notice how many people leave Egypt. Okay. It's a whole lot more than 66. Okay. So Egypt really was a good place for them to be. The rest of the world is going through a variety of suffering and stuff like that, but they really did prosper in Egypt. Okay. And by the same token, Caleb, if there are 2 million people in the Exodus, and I don't know how many there are, but you can see why Egypt would be concerned, wouldn't you? I mean, if all of a sudden in the state of Georgia we had 2 million migrant workers down in Valdosta, how concerned would we be? Very, right? Because if they all vote in a block, we're outvoted. So, and we may talk a little bit about the political situation in Egypt in the next couple of weeks too. But Egypt was going through some political problems too, so it was kind of a rough time in Egypt. So they get to Egypt. It's where God wanted them to be. God used all those terrible schemings of mankind to get them to Egypt. God predicted it to Abraham, said your people will go to Egypt, they'll stay there for 100 years, but then they'll come back to the promised land. So God is in control of the whole thing. Okay. Questions about that? All right. Major themes. How many times, hopefully y'all really are reading through the text. If you're not, please start, because it is important. How many times you hear the word covenant or see the word covenant? All the time. Each generation gets at least one covenant renewal, don't they? So God is reaffirming that with every generation. And we'll see that continue. The covenant is always the same, isn't it? I will provide, this is what I'll do for you. There is a strong theme of monotheism. We talked about the household gods, and that is something that is foreign to Judaism. Okay? We'll see even more of that when we get to Egypt and all the other places. But God is one. Let's just skip ahead right now. We got a minute or so. Go to Deuteronomy. You know, if Abraham is the genetic and spiritual father of all of Judaism, this is the theological father of Judaism. This is the theological foundation of Judaism. Somebody read me Deuteronomy 6, 4, 5, and 6. Actually, just 4. Deuteronomy 6, 4.
Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
Okay. That is the foundational statement of Israel, of Judaism. The Lord is one. The Lord is not Ishtar. The Lord is not Osiris. The Lord is not... The Lord is one. Okay? And that's what the Jews... If I shown you all a picture, I don't know if of the phylacteries... So they will literally take this verse, they put it in a little box, and when Orthodox Jews even today go to worship, they will wrap these boxes around their hands up to their elbow, and they'll wrap it around their heads. And it's this verse here, and they're doing it because this verse tells them that. But the point is, when they're getting ready to pray, to remember that they are Israel and God is one. So they still do that today. Have y'all ever seen a mezuzah? It's a little oblong box that they actually put on their front doors that has this verse inside it. And they do that because the verse says, wrap it around your hands, put it on your forehead, put it on your doorpost. To always remember, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Okay? So, I mean, for a large reason, why do they go into the exile? Because they forget that. They worship other gods. So monotheism is absolutely critical to Judaism. In Genesis, we see the beginning of sin. If you had to come up with I don't know if the right word is reason, rationale, an explanation of why Eve does what she does, why does she do it?
She wanted to.
She wanted to, right?
What she saw.
She liked what she saw. On some level, she thought her judgment was better than God's. God said, don't do it, but Eve said, I think I will. Because I think my judgment is better than God's. And I think that's the root of sin. Now, are we any different today? Exactly the same today. So that's sin enters the world. God has to separate himself from sin. So we see they kicked out of the Garden of Eden, right? So sin has consequences. When Israel deceives, what happens to him? He gets deceived. When David cheats, what happens to him? He gets cheated, right? When David has illegitimate sons, what happens to him? He has trouble with those illegitimate sons. Okay? When when Abram and Sarai decide they're going to take matters in their own hands about having children, what happens? Ishmael.
They create a monster.
They create a monster. Okay? And it's interesting that, well, we'll get that later. And they're still suffering with that today. Why do the Muslims not like Jews? I mean, there are a whole host of reasons, but I think it goes all the way back to that. They argue about religion, if nothing else, because they both claim Abraham, and they both claim the other one's wrong. And the Muslims can get very enthusiastic about it. Or enthusiastic is the other right. But those are all consequences of sin. And then again, the whole Bible is God's answer to that. You know, God has promised to provide, and it takes him, I guess, 66 books or whatever to provide. But that's the book of Revelation is the ultimate provision. Right? So where does this all come from? Okay. Hey Moses, why are we here? Okay. I grew up a slave in Egypt, and now I'm in the middle of the desert. Tell me again why I'm here? Who put you in charge? You know? Who are you? You're not the boss of me. All right. He's got to explain that. So why are we here? Where are we going? Why do we come here? Why do I have authority? Who is this God? As we go through Exodus, make just a mental note of how many times you hear or see the phrase, so that you will know that I am the Lord. All right. So Moses is writing that way. All right. Questions? Comments?
I have one that kind of shows Joseph's character.
Okay.
For 41 verse 50 or 51.
All right, 41, 51. Hang on just a second. All right.
That's Joseph called the name of his firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. And the name he called the second something.
Ephraim.
Yeah. For God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So it kind of shows you his character a little bit, and just his naming of the kids.
Yeah. And the 51, it made me forget my trouble and all my father's household. Because I don't, we're kind of giving Jacob a hard time, but it couldn't have been easy growing up in that environment either. With your parents constantly fighting and using you as a tool to fight against. Because every time Rebecca got mad at Isaac, she said something about Esau. And every time he got mad at her, he said something about Jacob. Because they're using the children as tools to fight. Yeah, that's a good verse. Anything else? All right. Have a great Monday off. Have a good cruise.